Meeting to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so welcome everyone to the November meeting of the Union Township Planning Commission, and roll call please.
Squadrito,
Here.
Albrecht,
Here.
Buckley,
Here.
LaBelle,
Here.
Lapp,
Here.
Shingles,
Here.
Thering,
Here.
Williams,
Here.
and Gross is excused today.
Okay, thank you. So, first item is approval of tonight's agenda. So you've got the agenda before you. It's got 3 new business items and 1 carryover business item. Is there anything anyone is aware of? Anything else that anyone is aware of that needs to be on tonight's agenda? If not, we can have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Motion is by Buckley, second by Shingles to approve tonight's agenda. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we have our agenda. Next item is approval of the minutes from the last meeting, which was October 18th. That's the second document in your packet. Are there any corrections to the October 18th minutes?
I see just a minor typo on correspondence under D. I think it's just supposed to be correspondence from.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. Anything else? We can have a motion to approve the minutes with the minor typographical correction.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion is by Williams, second by Lapp to approve the October 18th minutes. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we have our minutes. Next item is correspondence, board reports, and presentations. And first item is Commissioner Thering, updates from Board of Trustees.
Really, the big thing on our agenda right now is budget. So that's really all I have to report on, is that that's what we are currently in the process of.
Questions for Commissioner Thering? I guess, remind me, is the public hearing upcoming or it already took place? I believe it's upcoming, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I believe it's upcoming, and then we have, I'm sure we'll go to the December 14th meeting, and it'll be, I would imagine our vote on the budget will happen at that meeting. It could happen up until the 31st, but
The hearing is on the 22nd. It's a Tuesday meeting.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. Okay. Anything else for Commissioner Thering? It looks to me like they're putting the finishing touches on the road. Any further updates on when they might take down the barriers?
Haven't heard anything. I agree, it does look pretty much done, but I haven't heard when the barriers will come down.
Okay. Is there a working date for that?
Well, the original time frame was actually today. And that was before they added on the stretch further up Broomfield.
Yeah.
The updated version was before December 1st, and so I'm sure they're going to beat that very easily.
Was there supposed to be a flashing red there, or is it just signs? Do you know?
That I don't recall. I know it's a 4-way stop.
Right.
I don't recall if there's a flashing signal part of it.
But there's no stops up yet. There's no signs up yet.
Oh.
So I didn't know if they were just installing signs or if there was a 4-way flasher that they were talking about too or not. So
Okay.
I think
Alright.
that's what's holding it though.
Okay. Anything else on Board of Trustees matters? All right. So next item is Commissioner Buckley, updates from ZBA.
We have not had a meeting. We didn't have one for November. We did have a meeting that was added to December. I believe it's December 7th, regarding a zoning question and a use question for one of the local churches in town. We don't have there's not a packet out there. It's not on the website yet, so I don't know much more about it, but I'll have a full update, I guess, at our December meeting for the Plan Commission.
Any questions for Commissioner Buckley from other commissioners? Okay, thank you. Next update is Commissioner Shingles updates from sidewalks and pathways.
The only update, our October 27th meeting was canceled due to a lack of quorum. We were made aware that the current chair of the committee is electing to not continue. So we know that, and the next meeting is February, I think.
Next week will be January with
January.
Plan Commission.
With one, yeah. Okay. I have not attended a meeting yet, so this was the first meeting I was supposed to attend on October 27th.
Okay. So the township is still accepting applicants for that open position.
That's correct.
Any questions for Commissioner Shingles? Okay, thank you. Any other correspondence? Oh, correspondence from Isabella County regarding the Isabella County Master Plan. That was in your packet. Anything you guys want to say about that?
The timing, of course, wasn't great for our meeting because the hearing was on the 10th. But if anybody does have any comments, the master plan is available on their website. If you have any comments on it, you're welcome to share them with Ray Johnson, the zoning administrator. His email is in the notice.
Any other correspondence or presentations, anything else that anyone has that needs to come before us tonight? Okay, so we'll move on. So we'll move to public comment. So at our meetings, we have a public comment towards the beginning of the meeting, which is on items that are not on our agenda. Then we have a public comment towards the end of the meeting on any item. So this public comment is for items that are not on tonight's agenda. We ask if you want to make a public comment, just come to the podium, give us your name and address for the minutes, and limit your comments to 3 minutes on an item not on tonight's agenda. So this public comment's open at 7:12. And I'm seeing not even a twitch from the audience, and so we'll go ahead and leave that. We'll leave that be, so we'll assume everyone's here for other purposes. We'll go ahead and close the public comment. We're ready to move on to new business. First item is PSPR 22-19, the Prestige Center Assisted Living and Memory Care Expansion. It's a combined preliminary and final site plan application. And so turn it over to Rodney for the introduction.
Thank you. You should have your packet, our report dated November the 4th, and a copy of the combined preliminary and final site plan dated October 19th. This is a project you've seen before. This is our planned unit development project on East Broadway for the Prestige Center, the expansion of the assisted living facility there, to also include expanded assisted living and a memory care. The applicant has chosen to propose this to you as a combined preliminary and final site plan. That is an option in our ordinance. For purposes of approval, we approve both. If you take action, it would be take action on the combined plan. The effect really is they have to meet the final site plan standards. So you do have a copy of our report. We note in our report that we have received confirmations of approvals and permits from all the outside agencies that are involved, including our Public Services Department. This project includes moving a water main that runs through the property. So it's a pretty significant project involving the Public Services Department. We also did note that while the project substantially complies with the preliminary site plan approval requirements and information standards, it does not comply with the final site plan requirements. So our report, we've recommended that you only take action on this as a preliminary site plan for tonight. But with that, I'm happy to answer your questions as we go along.
Okay. Any immediate questions for Rodney?
So basically, it doesn't meet the final site plan because it doesn't show bicycle parking, drive aisle, dumpster enclosure, landscaping, loading area, and exterior lighting.
Right, those details, which are all final site plan requirements,
I
were not part
understand.
of the
I'm
plan.
just trying to verify. I just, in the I mean, he's been working on this a long time, and we've addressed this before. There's no avenue of, I mean, they got all the outside agency approval where there can't be a conversation, or maybe there is, to say, hey, you got some just housework, really, light housework to do, and that now they gotta come back in another month, right?
Well, I will say this, I would encourage you to hear from the applicant on this, but there are several items on this list in which you as a planning commission have some ability to approve what the ordinance calls modifications, related to landscaping potentially, related to the loading zone, where if the item is in the hands of administration, we can't grant modifications. We have to say, thou shalt do it exactly as the ordinance says. And so there is value in them coming back to the planning commission. If this truly was housekeeping, we would recommend it for a conditional approval, subject to those housekeeping details being taken care of as we've done before.
Okay. Thank you. So at this point, I think we're ready to hear from the applicant or the applicant's representative. The floor is yours.
Good evening. My name is Justin Longstreth with Moore and Bruging Engineers, representing the applicant tonight. If there are questions of the applicant, there is representative here from Ownership Group. If I can't, for whatever reason, answer the question, I will turn the mic over to them. But Rodney had a great introduction. This is a project that was in front of you guys a couple of months ago. It has not changed since you saw it last in June. We've been working the past couple of months to obtain the approvals from the outside agencies, and now feel we're ready to move forward with the next steps in the approval process. We've been through staff review letter and memo that's in the planning commissioner's packets tonight. None of the items in that are substantial, in our opinion. Pretty easily to work through those. So we did apply for both preliminary and final site plan approval tonight. If it's in the planning commission's interest to just move forward preliminary, we understand that. We'll come back next month. The items, again, are fairly minor, in our opinion. So if there are any specific questions, I'd gladly answer those.
When is your targeted construction supposed to commence?
Next spring, I think. is
Okay,
when
so
we'll break
there's
ground.
time here in terms of coming back and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and we understand, in speaking with township staff, that the submittal deadline is not, it's not that far out, where we would intend to be in front of you guys next month.
Right.
In December.
Right.
So
Okay.
we tried to push it along as quickly as we could.
Okay, we've heard from the applicant. The applicants are representative. They're here. It's open for questions from commissioners.
You said that these remediation here on the site plan, you said you feel those are relatively minor. Are you confident then that if we were to approve as a preliminary that you could have those corrections made by next month?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
further comment, I'll make a motion to approve only the preliminary site plan as presented. To approve only the PSPR 22-19 preliminary site plan dated October 19th, 2022 for the Prestige Center Assisted Living and Memory Care expansion located at 5785 East Broadway Road in the northeast quarter of Section 13 in the PUD Planned Unit Development Zoning District, finding that the site plan fully complies with the applicable zoning ordinance requirements for preliminary site plan approval, including sections 14.2.p, required site plan information, and 14.2.s, standards for site plan approval.
Support.
Okay, so there was
Well, sorry, I probably need,
Oh.
we don't need conditions on the
You don't, those are all
preliminary.
final site plan
That's all, okay,
requirements.
perfect. That's what I thought. Thanks.
Okay, so, motion was made by LaBelle and it was seconded by Buckley. I guess the only thing I would ask, I think the applicant should know whether the assumption is, that they're gonna come back and they're gonna comply with what's been suggested in terms of the items they're including in the revised final site plan. Is that accurate?
Are you saying that if they come back and they have complied, are you asking if they should expect approval at that point? Is that what you're saying, or?
Yeah, basically, I mean, because we had the choice between a motion that approved this one as is and the one where it enumerated the conditions. And since we decided if we're not gonna enumerate the conditions, I think, you know, if a majority of the people feel I guess if a majority of the people felt that the conditions weren't warranted, then we could have approved the whole thing, but I guess I'm just saying, I'm kind of asking, is the assumption that they're gonna make those changes and that's what we're gonna see next month?
I think that's a fair question. I was a little confused as to why we had both motions because as a preliminary site plan, everything that would be a condition is part of the final site plan. So the expectation would be that they adhere to the expectations of the final site plan. I don't know that I have no problem, including those conditions, but none of them are outside of the final
Yeah.
site plan. So.
That's a fine, I think that's an appropriate answer. Right. Okay, any further discussion on the motion to give preliminary approval to this site plan? Okay, hearing none, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Lamb,
Yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Buckley,
Yes.
LaBelle,
Yes.
Albrecht,
Yes.
Pedrito,
Yes.
Shingles,
Yes.
Waring.
Yes.
That's all yeses, motion carried.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we'll look forward to seeing that next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next item is master plan discussion. You have a document in your packet called Redevelopment Ready Communities Best Practices, and so Rodney's going to give us a brief, not brief, but an introduction to this topic.
Well, thank you. So our master plan was adopted in 2018. Per the State Planning Act, we are required to review it at least once every 5 years. We, being the royal we, the Planning Commission, is required to review it at least every 5 years, and that is to essentially take a look at it and decide ultimately whether you feel it's still current, that it doesn't need to be changed, that it's completely valid as is, or if you feel that there is a need to update it in some way. And as far as the Planning Act is concerned, the only action that needs to be taken is essentially a motion to either say we love it and we're happy with it and no changes, or we think it ought to be updated. And if you think it ought to be updated, that essentially starts the process to update it. From there, we would then move forward with initiating that process. There is some, I will say this, because it's a 5-year review, there is some funds that we've proposed in the recommended budget that's currently in the Board of Trustees' hands, simply to be available if you decide that the plan should be updated. This program here that I bring to you tonight, this is from the state of Michigan. Michigan Economic Development Corporation, MEDC, has a program. It's wandered around state government, a few different agencies over the years, but it's called the Redevelopment Ready Communities. It's now in the economic development hands. Essentially this is a program that invites local governments to follow a certain set of best practices related to planning, zoning, land development. Some of these, in fact, quite a few of these we already are following related to the updates we've done in our zoning ordinance and how we handle development approval processes. There are always improvements that we can make to that, but a couple of them directly involve the master plan, and in particular the first of the best practices. What I've brought to you tonight, first of all, to introduce this program to you. It's something that we can choose to get involved in formally. The staff has taken some kind of what might say preliminary steps, and essentially we've gone through initial training so that we are eligible to proceed further if we wish to. So particularly as part of the master plan review and a potential update, this is a good time to consider becoming more involved in this program, because the master plan is a very important component of the best practices that they recommend, and of course it's a very important component of guiding the community in terms of what we want our community to be like 5 or 10 or 20 years from now. So I want to share the whole best practice booklet with you, and then ask you to consider whether this is something you'd like to or be interested in incorporating into a review of the master plan, where we make these best practices part of what we look at as we're looking at the master plan, and perhaps if you choose to update the plan as part of an update of that plan. If it is something you're interested in, kind of the next step in the process of becoming involved with the Redevelopment Ready Communities program is a resolution. It's actually a Board of Trustees resolution that simply says we agree to be a part of it. If you're interested in it, what we would do is bring you back a draft resolution that you could take a look at your next meeting. And if you're comfortable with it, you can make a recommendation on it to the Board of Trustees. So tonight's really just an introduction. I'm happy to answer questions. But if there is interest in looking at this further, then we will come back to you with that draft resolution.
Questions for Rodney on this? What is it, other than there may be some good ideas in here that we want to incorporate into the master plan, what else does it do for us?
Well, actually, one of the things that if we become a redevelopment ready community, if we are certified as satisfying the requirements for that certification, we also become eligible for some potential grant money. So there are some grant programs through the state that are only available to redevelopment ready certified communities. So that's a benefit. We also have the ability to say on our website that we're a redevelopment ready community. We have the ability to take advantage of opportunities that may come from letting be more forward on that element as well. The main benefit, the program really, I think, comes actually in the process to look at what do we want our community to be like, how do we want to interact with both the public in terms of public participation, master plan and such, update and such, but also in terms of looking at our development processes. We've had some conversations about that. We've updated the ordinance, is there more we can do? This is a good framework for looking at those topics and those issues. It also does bring some additional help in from the state. They do provide some counsel. They have experts in various areas that can give assistance in that regard. So it's certainly a good element there as well.
I guess I feel like setting aside the idea of access to potential grant money and that sort of thing, it sounds like it's providing a backbone for the process itself, and some guidance that we can adhere to and kind of work our way through the process. I came in at the tail end of our last master planning, I think maybe a year, I think the last year of the master planning process, so maybe halfway, I guess, I don't know. And, obviously we had Peter there to guide us. Now we have Rodney and Peter to guide us, and if we have some sort of backbone that would allow us to, I guess for lack of a better word, have a certification to the process, I would support doing it. I would support anything that helps us guide us through the process in a more holistic and, big picture perspective, I guess.
Other thoughts?
It does seem like a good portion of this is really directed towards a denser population, both in terms of maybe a city versus a township, especially one that's split between rural and more populated the way ours is. So I guess that would be my one hesitation with something like this, is that it perhaps might be overkill for what the needs are of the township. I do think, it's clear that we are already doing a number of the things that are in here, so I think it does provide direction. But I guess I just would wonder whether the commitment into a program like this would be worth it in the long run for the township.
And I guess Rodney can answer. Is it kind of self-paced in the sense of you move more quickly through things that may not be as pertinent to the town, to the community, or is it, as Commissioner Lapp is suggesting, does it make our process kind of more long, drawn out, and tedious, or is it more self-paced in the sense of we're going to go through the process, but we're going to focus specifically on the things that are most meaningful to us?
I would say the latter. In terms of the state, they essentially offer your best practices. If you choose to make adjustments, if you need to follow them, we will acknowledge that through the certification process. We can use these and never become certified, and we can choose what we feel is helpful to us and set the rest aside if we're not pursuing certification. And my thought is this: in terms of becoming a redevelopment ready certified community, I think that happens if we choose in the end to follow all the practices, and we simply say, hey, come on in, we've done this, come look.
Yeah.
If we don't, I think we benefit, as you said, from simply considering these as part of our guidelines, as part of the discussion on the master plan, as part of looking at the zoning ordinance and other ordinances, and our development practices and development policies. I agree that it is focused on more urban communities. The city of Mount Pleasant went through this process a while ago, for example. Interesting, Charter Township Union has a substantial area of commercial and industrial development, far more than most townships have. And some of that is in the process of redeveloping, essentially. We've had some turnover, we have some vacant areas, underutilized areas. So in that sense, I think we do have some opportunity to perhaps benefit from the more urban thought. But frankly, a part of being redevelopment ready is also knowing where you want development to go and saying we want it there and not here. And our master plan does a good job with that right now, in terms of the rural buffer and rural preservation language in the plan. I think we can even do more with that to make it absolutely clear. We want things here, and we're willing to look at things that are perhaps a little more dense in these areas. At the same time, we want to preserve the rural character in those areas that are rural. So that, to me, is really part of being a redevelopment-ready community. It may not be part of their program, but to me, it's being clear to the development community, this is where we want things to happen, and this is where we want to protect the rural character, the agricultural economy of the community.
One of the things that I see, and I guess I would just add my plug this way, is that I like the idea, whether it's this or something else, of having anything more that helps us to, I don't know if it's just justify or, but also maybe it's to provide evidence to. We're having conversations right now about how we make sure that we're open to business development and that sort of thing and what that means to us. But we're also, I feel that Union Township is, if you look at 20-year projections, there's a sliver from Lansing to Mount Pleasant that are forecast for growth in the next 20 years. Much of Michigan is not forecast for growth, but Mount Pleasant is still in that swath that they do forecast growth. And I feel like the township is not there yet, but reaching a tipping point where we will have to make more difficult decisions in the future if we're going to preserve the character of the community and that sort of thing. And to me, I do feel like having a more formal process of going through this provides us justification, especially when people come to the Planning Commission. And when they're at the Zoning Board of Appeals, they're asking for exactly those things that we're trying to avoid. Leapfrog zoning, spot zoning variances, those sorts of things that are that can really sometimes sabotage your master planning. So I don't know. I'm supportive. I don't know if we should vote on it, or if it's just a case of the general vibe, or what.
If there's a general consensus, as I said, we can come back next month with that draft resolution. It's ultimately a Board of Trustees resolution. Bring it to you, and if this is something you're comfortable with, this is the body that would be implementing it. So and then you can decide if this is something you'd like to pursue, and then simply recommend the resolution to the board if you feel that way.
Is there an approximate cost for the certification?
Actually, there's not been any reference to cost in this process. So this is just a state program that's been available to help local communities in terms of improving the function of the land development and as I said, implementing certain best practices. So for right now, anyway, I'm not aware of any cost associated with it.
Okay, so at this time, there'd be no cost to the taxpayers of the township, right? Or even the township itself?
Right.
Okay. If there is a change in that position, you'll let us know?
I will do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm hearing that at least looking at a draft resolution looks like the appropriate next step. So read through this in more detail and give some thought to it, and we'll look at this again probably next month.
Yeah, I would say if you would hang on to that part of the packet, so what we'll do is for next month, we'll just put the resolution in the packet.
Okay. So it sounds like, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like participating in this and even becoming a redevelopment-ready community, it doesn't commit us to any particular, in and of itself doesn't commit us to any particular direction with regard to more development, less development, or development here versus development there. We're still making those decisions. It's just a matter of kind of the practices and I guess the world knows that we've chosen to adhere to those practices and so on. In other words, it's not a well, I noticed the little R, so there's a registered trademark on it, which I don't know if it's really just MEDC. There isn't like a for-profit company involved in this or something like that?
This was created by the state of Michigan.
Okay.
I don't remember what agency, I think it may have been associated with historic preservation initially.
Yeah.
But it's wandered out a couple of different departments and it's ended up in the economic development realm. But it was created by folks at the state of Michigan.
Okay. And I understand that some people think that it's actually would have been better if it had come out of the private sector and not out of the state government. But when I see the trademark, I always wonder, is there some agenda being pushed behind it? But it sounds like it's just kind of good government sorts of things, or.
Well, I think it largely has to do with ensuring that if a local government chooses to say we're a redevelopment ready community, that it's because they met those standards and somebody has verified that.
Yeah.
As I said, right now we can put on our website, we're redevelopment ready, but in reality, we violating that trademark.
Well, yeah, you can't do that because you get
Exactly.
sued.
But we do it. We have a number of practices that we've instituted to make it easier to work with the development community, especially those that are kind of kicking the tires earlier on, bringing plans to you earlier in the process, in more conceptual character. Some of those elements that we've done are, as was mentioned, right in line with this, these best practices that they talk about. And that's not a coincidence. I've been aware of the program for a while. It's just now with the master plan, it's a good time to bring it forward and have you consider it. I think there's some value in it overall, and definitely value in terms of guiding our thinking in terms of the future of the community. They do have some things that they want you to look at. As you said, as Commissioner Lapp said, that are more urban. It doesn't mean you have to choose to accept them. They're just asking you to consider a variety of housing types and that sort of thing as part of any planning document.
Very good. Thank you. Don't get too comfortable because I think you're getting up again. So the next item is proposal for a township initiated rezoning. So this is about the bunch of property south of here off of Lincoln and Broomfield.
Right. This started with the parcel at 4245 South Lincoln Road, and contact from a real estate agent that was marketing the property. The assessor showed the property as commercial industrial, and they thought that was the zoning. We had given them bad news that was the assessor's use code, essentially saying that's what the existing use in terms of for tax purposes is. The property is actually zoned residential. It's one that's been around a very long time. It was built back in the very early 70s, just after our first zoning ordinance was adopted in 1971. It started out as a Kiwanis club, it's a private club, which at that time was allowed as a special use in the agricultural district, which is what it's zoned. We did find, as I think is noted in the packet here, evidence of that special use permit approval for that Kiwanis club. It then evolved over time. There were a couple of zoning board of appeals actions to try to deal with those evolving activities. Where they were treated as substitution, non-conforming uses, that ended up with the company you see in the packet. They're talking about the Lockheed company, which was essentially an office and distribution facility, warehouse space, that the zoning board of appeals found to be appropriate to substitute for the prior use. So the end result of this is that this property had a very narrow set of activities that it could be used for. First of all, anything in the R1, obviously it's not a residential, it's not a house. It could be used as a church or some other things like that, but there's anything in the R1 could have been done. And then basically anything that was related to either that special use permit, so it could be a private club, like the Kiwanis Club, that special use permit is still valid. Or it could be what the zoning board of appeals declared it could be, which is essentially that office and very narrow window of distribution type warehouse activities. So there have been a couple of folks that have looked at it. One that I thought was going to pursue it, that actually fit within that narrow window. They ultimately, I guess, had a corporate change of something not related to the site that caused them to step away from it. And we've had another activity that's looking at it, similar activity. Some challenges related to the warehouse part of it, but they have a plan for that. All of that led us to look at this site and this area around it, and we thought there was value in bringing this to you to consider whether this is something that we should address. If you look on page 56, page 2 of our report, we have the zoning map and then the master plan, future land use map down below. You see the zoning map, R1. You can see some of the activities around it. The property just to the east is the City of Mount Pleasant's water treatment facility. The master plan shows it as part of this rural buffer area, which is an area that is intended for very rural activities. It's also an area not intended to be served by utilities. Now, interestingly, this site is served by utilities. My report is incorrect. I noted in the report that 4245 is not served by public utilities. I learned after this report was completed that it's simply not served by township utilities. The city of Mount Pleasant provides water and sewer service to this site, basically because their property is right next door. So it is served by water and sewer. So it basically has the same services that our property that would be zoned commercial or industrial would have. Between it and the water treatment plant behind it, they are definitely not residential uses. They're also not rural buffer type activities either. And so we felt it was worth bringing to you to look at, is there something that perhaps we should consider doing in terms of a township initiated action. To rezone only 4245 South Lincoln is possible. That, the owner could come in and apply for any rezoning if they choose. But we looked at this and thought there might be value in looking at least looking at both 4245 and the water treatment plant to put them in a district that's more appropriate for the activity, whether it be something like B5 or the I-1 district. Either of those would allow the office and warehouse type activities that are on the Lincoln Road property. We also added in the property further to the east on Broomfield, just to take a look at. That property is interestingly, it's master planned in this recreation institutional classification. Certainly the golf center driving range fits within that. The Broomfield Commons, the multi-tenant space next door, commercial space next door, doesn't really fit well with that, other than perhaps the jump station. And then there's vacant land basically to the east of that at the city border. We brought that in because it's worth taking a look at. Is there something, should we be doing something with that as well? So in this packet, we gave you the information on the 4245 site, all the history that we looked up as we were working with the various agents for that. Beyond that, we give you some of the background on the other properties. And then we just included at the end here some potential options. This is on page 59. From a staff perspective, we feel there's value in looking at considering the rezoning of especially those two properties, 4245 South Lincoln and the city-owned property behind it, to put them in a district that is more appropriate to the existing use, so that building can be used without having to fit within the very narrow scope that it currently has, basically, of those ZBA decisions. So that's one option, and as I said, the B5 district would allow for that. The B5 district allows warehousing as a special use, so they'd have to come to you and get a special use permit. But that is an option. And B5 also allows for office, so that side of things is no trouble, and it wouldn't affect the city's property in a significant way. The I-1 district would be the other option. It would allow both the office and the warehouse activities of 4245 as uses by right, so they could simply move in and continue the activity. They would not need to come before you. And then we include some other options, looking at more broadly at the space. The Broomfield Commons in particular, the zoning there, it's all B4, general business. The use of that property tends to be more of a warehouse, office kind of a space, especially the back part, which is not a good fit with the B4. It's fairly tight window there too. So that's why we included those properties, just to consider whether there's something to look at. And then items C and D are basically kind of not doing anything right now in terms of zoning, but making this a priority in terms of looking at the master plan, either looking at a master plan amendment for this area, which we certainly could do, where we study this area in particular, or as part of a broader master plan update. So just some things to think about. This is not something we are required to do. The property does have lawful uses. And as I said, we've been working with the gentleman that's looking at 4245 is here tonight, so he can answer questions as well. About his view of it, but is that we can do nothing. We can initiate a rezoning, both narrow or broad. We can look at this as simply as part of our master plan project.
Questions for Rodney on the presentation?
Would any changes made negatively affect any of the other surrounding, any of the areas, any of the businesses?
Well, you can see, if you look at the map, right now where I would have concern in terms of the area to the east on Broomfield is with the Golf Center Drive-In Ridge, because the B4 district specifically allows that activity. The B5 does not right now, and certainly industrial does not. So I think we'd have to work around existing uses and decide which properties we would make an adjustment to. As I said, the property to the east of the Golf Center, the Broomfield Commons, I think would benefit from moving to the B5. Just moving from one commercial district, one business district to the other. But the B5 happens to allow warehousing as a special use, and that property is designed more for warehousing. So there might be value in looking at that property and the vacant property to the east of it and putting them into B5, just to give them a little bit broader mix of potential activities that could go on there. In terms of the area right on Lincoln, you can see on the zoning map there, we just noted the existing residences. Obviously, if you rezone property from residential to business or industrial, you have the potential to change the use relationship between that and existing houses. The thing is here, though, is that these activities are already there. The Zoning Board of Appeals made those decisions years ago that allowed the Lockheed Corporation to come in with what amounts to a commercial industrial type activity. And so I don't know that there's a huge effect, but it nonetheless would have an effect on the residences simply because they're next door to that activity.
If this is something we move forward with, then would all affected in this area that we're talking about be notified so they'd have an opportunity to either follow along or voice any opinion they may have?
I suspect, based on the property boundaries, that all of those folks on that area to the north and around it would be notified. Everybody within 300 feet of any parcel proposed to be rezoned would receive notice of the rezoning.
That's right. Yep.
And if we do a narrow rezoning of just 4245 in the city of Mount Pleasant property, that would bring essentially all those folks along Broomfield and Lincoln. They would be within that 300 feet.
The city property doesn't technically need, or city-owned property doesn't technically need, I shouldn't say city. Ooh, no, it's township property, right?
It's in the township. It's owned by the city of Mount Pleasant. It's a city of Mount Pleasant facility, wastewater facility.
Okay, but so, because that's designated an essential service, they don't technically need rezoning.
Right. The reason to include them is really because it helps to create a more cohesive district. Whatever we put into, whether it's the B5 or the I1, those are the two districts that really are a good fit for the existing use. That unifies them with the B4 districts to each. We have kind of a cohesive district rather than what you might call spot zoning. If we just rezone 4245, B5 it's surrounded by residential. We want to try to create a cohesive district if we can. And so that's bringing the city property in does that. Well, I assume that the wastewater treatment plant will be there for many, many years. If at some point down the road they choose to do something else, that property would not be developed for residential. But it could be redeveloped for something like, in commercial or warehouse or industrial. So I think there's value in making the change, even looking further ahead down the road.
And you said the gentleman that's here is the interested buyer, or what?
What, is there, if he comes up and just
Yeah,
says a
no.
few words?
My name is Patrick Sawhill. I am one of the owners of Serve Pro of Mount Pleasant Clare and Houghton Lake. We saw the building over there. It's perfect for what we need. As I understand it, it's zoned residential, obviously, with some ZBA things that are extremely narrow in scope, excuse me. But our use for it would be office and then storage of contents, equipment, vehicles, people's contents. That have fires and water damage and stuff like that. So taking it in, cleaning it, reboxing it, taking it back to them, storing it on site until their houses are repaired, taking it out on site. In my opinion, obviously this is my opinion, we would not affect the community or anyone around any more, probably far, far less than the wastewater treatment plant trucks coming in and out of there. But that is just an opinion, so.
So, do you have specific concerns over the current accepted use? Do you have specific concerns that you would not be able to
So,
meet your objectives?
in talking with Rodney and I think talking with Peter as well, what kind of the crux of the issue is, Lockheed's ZBA is warehouse distribution, so boxes come in, boxes go out. It's the kind of unboxing, cleaning on site, reboxing is the kind of the issue there for us.
Yeah, what we did is we looked at the activity, and the determination was made that the activity that did not fit within that narrow window of the zoning board of appeals action related to Lockheed was the cleaning activity. So you might say restoration activities related to fire damaged or smoke damaged materials. So what Pat is looking at is you basically going to do that off-site right now.
Correct. We currently we have our building on Valley Road, and then we also rent a space off Lincoln on Independence where we can do the cleaning until we get this figured out.
So I'm guessing, I believe that state law now requires if you're cleaning anything that's been damaged by fire, smoke, that sort of thing, that water, any waste, gray water has to be captured and can't go into a drain bed, that sort of thing. Is that something that would your business be doing that, I suppose, if you were to locate there and kind of do everything that you wanted to do there? Is there a capacity to take care of that? And maybe I'm wrong.
I've not heard that as far as content cleaning. I've not heard that. I've had a conversation with our corporate office regarding that in the state of Michigan. I have not heard that.
The only reason I ask is I'm a retired firefighter, and
Sure.
I know that there was a time, it's been 10 years ago, that fire departments were required to capture all of the water coming off truck washing, equipment washing, that sort of thing inside the barns to capture contaminants. And so I would have assumed that would apply to anybody who's washing similar contaminants off them, but I don't know. So
As far as any issues that we've had with that, there's 63 Serve Pros in the state.
yeah,
There's 2,000. I don't know anybody that has that
okay,
regulation. I could be. You are scaring me right
no, that's not my intention. But
now. But I don't know anything about that. Certainly, being as though it's serviced by water and sewer is a better situation for us.
And I know that at the fire departments, what they were required was to have an outside holding tank that they then had to have pumped. So
Yeah.
it wasn't huge, but it was.
Now we have that regulation with biohazard
Yeah,
cleanup, but that is not something we do on site.
right,
That would not be done on that.
right.
In that property.
Okay.
So, from a very layman's perspective, I was like, oh, this is, yeah. But it's not.
Right.
It just
Yeah.
isn't. So, we're trying to get that figured out. And also, I agree with Rodney. I mean, that to me, that property is definitely not residential in its nature, nor is the wastewater treatment plant.
Yeah. So, Rodney, would it be, and without putting you on the spot in terms of whether or not you're going to purchase the property or not purchase the property, but would it, in terms of the available options to us, would this, obviously if this is like an administrative rezoning, there's not necessarily a cost to any property owner, and if it were to come through as a request for a rezoning, there's probably a cost to make that request. But I didn't see an option in the paperwork to simply have an applicant apply for rezoning normally.
Well, it was not one of the four options we offered just because we're proposing it as a township action. Absolutely. The owner of the property can apply for rezoning of 4245. Obviously, they can apply for rezoning of the city property next door. But yes, certainly private rezoning action can take place. One of the challenges we have with a private action just for 4245 is the concept of spot zoning. Spot zoning is not a planning term; it's a legal term. It was coined by the courts. You don't find it in the State Zoning Act anywhere, but it nonetheless is a valid concept. The idea of establishing a district that is surrounded essentially by an incompatible district. You know, dropping industrial zoning in the midst of farmland. You know, it might be considered spot zoning. In this case, dropping B5 or an I-1 district on just 4245 South Lincoln, otherwise surrounded by residential, could be looked at as spot zoning. Now, that doesn't mean that you could not recommend it and the Board of Trustees approve it. As I said, this is a court term. It usually comes up where there's some kind of legal action and somebody doesn't like what's being proposed. This is a difficult case. The idea is to propose rezoning that is against your master plan. Your master plan says rural buffer. It should stay rural, period, permanently. It also says that it should not have water and sewer. So what we have is we have a master plan that doesn't really reflect the actual conditions in this little corner of the township. And so that's why we're proposing to kind of, is this something we should look at as a township? Because in reality, while we could rezone just 4245, whether that be through a private action by the owner or by a township action, it really would be better if we're looking at doing this to make it part of at least something contiguous to a commercial area, which is the B4 area that is along Broomfield. It at least gets close to that and makes a little bit more sense from that perspective. It is a difficult case, and it's essentially brought on by a pair of Zoning Board of Appeals decisions that allowed activity on this property that was never intended to be there. As I said, the special use permit was a Kiwanis Club, which was a lawful use in the ag district at the time that was approved in the early 1970, whatever it was, 2 or 3.
1973.
Yeah. And the property morphed from there. I mean, as you look at it, you see the history. It kind of evolved from there. But much of that evolution was related to a pair of Zoning Board of Appeals decisions. Now, those decisions were in response to people choosing to do things with the property that they shouldn't have been doing. But the Board of Appeals gave essentially approval to that. That created a circumstance where now we have a site, building, and activities that are very not consistent with a master plan and definitely not consistent with the zoning. So it's worth looking at.
To answer your question, putting me on the spot is fine. We're going to purchase the building. The value of storage there for us to charge for storage is far beyond what we would pay in rent to someplace to wipe for several months while we figure this out.
Yeah.
And so that it's a value for us.
Yeah. I don't want to. Anybody interrupt if
Oh, I was just going to ask why you're not recommending B4, why B5? If you wanted to keep to a contiguous business connection.
Last year, we adopted a set of punch list zoning amendments, and as part of that, we adopted changes to the B5 and the B7 commercial districts that allowed for warehousing, distribution, and light manufacturing, I think are the three activities, as special uses. And the reason we did that is because our B5 and especially our B7 areas, there's a lot of vacant land. Certainly a lot of underutilized land. in our industrial districts, where these three activities would otherwise are allowed by right, there's not as much land available that also has the road network available to support it. And so we did not add those activities to B4. B4 it's called general business. It really functions more as a local business district. And so the B5 happens to be the best fit that would allow them to propose to you a special use permit to allow the warehousing activities, and including the cleaning that they would like to do.
It appears that one of the overwhelming factors in this is the location of the golf center and the water treatment plant. Does that make this property less valuable in terms of what its intended use was? Thus the whole idea, because obviously you gave us some options: narrow zoning, broad subject area rezone, several different menu items to choose from. Does it make the property less value by virtue of what its limitations are? By virtue of what's around it?
I can't speak to value. I certainly know that the obviously the real estate agents we work with.
Maybe a better word is desirable,
Yeah.
not valuable.
It's certainly more troublesome because, as I said, it's a very narrow window that they have to work within. Zoning limits the use of property. It narrows the window up, you might say. But the ZBA decisions were very specific, and so the window's narrow to work in. Obviously, CertPro has looked at this, and they can at least bring most of their activities there, but not everybody can. So yes, rezoning it to a district where it's a lawful use, where we get rid of all the zoning board of appeals decisions. We don't worry about all those old special use permits, because now we're working with just what the zoning ordinance allows, and they can come before you and apply for a special use permit to pursue the warehousing part of it. That certainly is valuable, I think, to any property owner, but it also, frankly, is valuable to the township because it makes it easier to work with the owners of the property, businesses that are choosing to be in the community.
Thank you.
So I do, so first and foremost, I do think that it makes sense to somehow codify the legitimate use that it's had for the past 40, 50 years. I think it's important to do that in some fashion or another. I do have concerns about, there is residential there on the corners, and certainly further west of the intersection, but also south on Broomfield too. So I don't want all of Broomfield to be entirely incompatible with residential. But it sounds like what you're saying is, and I have the master plan in front of me. I don't have the actual descriptions of the zoning districts. If we were to go B5, then we could do, then warehousing and some light industrial would be a special use. That's correct?
Right. Warehousing, distribution, basically distribution is the Amazon facility.
Right.
Warehousing, distribution, and light manufacturing are the three activities we added to the B5, all as special uses.
And then in terms of other, I've traditionally thought of B5 as like auto lots and landscaping businesses. Obviously there's more, but I'm trying to remember what else is in use by right for B5 as opposed to B4.
The B5, just going to give you the best example, the area around Walmart and Menards, that's all B5. So you have banks, you have restaurants, you have obviously the big box stores, all that's part of it.
So from that standpoint, we could still develop. If there was an interested party that came in along Broomfield and said, "Hey, I want to put in either a restaurant or I want to put in some sort of retail outlet." We're not going prohibitive by doing B5 versus light industrial.
That is correct. Yes, they would have that a broader option.
Okay.
What we would probably do, if you look at page 56, the zoning map and master plan, I think if we were looking broadly at all those properties, I think what I would probably recommend is, because you can see that even with the B4 right now, 2 of those 3 properties are split zoned. the golf center driving range, only the frontage on Broomfield is B4. Most of the property is being used as a driving range, so actually, it would really be a good idea to extend that B4 to cover the entire parcel so that the whole parcel is in the correct zoning district, the whole use is in the correct zoning district. But even with the vacant parcel, the L-shaped parcel to the east of the Broomfield Commons development, same thing there. I think there's value in having that in one zoning classification rather than split zone between the two. Because this, you see with the Broomfield Commons, which is developed not all the way to the back, but much of the way along there. That Broomfield Commons commercial office warehouse type of development there essentially creates a situation where the property around it is not useful for residential. You know, would you run a subdivision around that in a U? No developer would do that. So I think there's value in looking at unifying those parcels under one zoning classification. You know, at the golf center, we probably do it as B4 because that matches the use. With the other two parcels to the east, the Broomfield Commons and the vacant parcel to the east, probably do those as B5 if we were going to make a broad change, because then that brings in the potential for warehousing and the other activities as well.
Could I just get in on this? Well, first of all, this southwest corner of the township, if you consider this to be part of the so-called ring road system around the township, this is, I think the southwest, it's fair to say, is probably the least developed, quadrant of the township. And there are reasons why it was marked rural buffer in the original. I mean, granted, yes, there's a water treatment plant up there, and yes, there's this other thing doing whatever, but when you drive by on the streets, it has more or less a rural feel to it. And so I'm kind of bothered by the idea that just because, 20 or 30 years ago, some weird decisions were made before we had regulated zoning in this community and sensible governance, that now we have to open up this whole big area to highway business and who knows what.
I would say the CDA decisions were not that long ago. 2005.
Well, yeah, but once you have something there and somebody comes before them, the tendency is not to want to shut people down and make it so that they can't earn a living. But the original decisions are quite old.
Yeah. What I would say is certainly there's no need to make any decision tonight. This was, again, it's somewhat like the master plan discussion we just had. This was to introduce this, to bring it to your attention. Is something that I would encourage you to think about. Drive by there. Hopefully the road will be open very soon. But you can certainly get at it from the south along Lincoln and see that side. That area immediately at the water treatment plant and 42, 45, that's not residential on that side. It looks like a business park. And really, actually on the map here, on the zoning map, you can see the property, residence to the north, next property up actually has an office building on it that has its own history. That I don't have all of that history. I did look up some of it. I noted as Excel Communications. I think they're actually not there anymore. At least according to the assessor, they're not there. According to the assessor, the property is currently being used for a private workshop, but it looks like a single-story office building. And so that immediate area does not look or feel or function as residential. It really looks like a business park that has a house or two in it. So it is an area. It's a challenge, and I agree. It is an area that certainly the area around it is intended to remain rural. You go to the south, you go to the west, and that area is definitely that's the start of the rural part of the township there. This is a spot that is a transition, I suppose you might say. But the fact that it has water and sewer is a big problem because the rural buffer area is not intended to include areas that have water and sewer. And so we do have...
It's not our water and sewer, though.
Well, the city and the township do cooperate. There are township residents who have city utilities like this, and there are, in a few cases, city residents have township utilities, one or the other.
I get Mount Pleasant water.
Yeah, I know.
Place,
Our neighborhood
yeah.
is that way.
I would say that I do see your point, and my initial gut reaction to this when I read it was, even though it's spot zoning, and I'm not a fan of any kind of leapfrog or spot zoning, the most conservative course of action here is to recognize the current use of that specific parcel and consider a rezoning just for that, and then to have future conversation about what we want to do with the rest, because then it does make the kind of the use of that a little bit more straightforward, instead of trying to rely on, you know, what amounts to kind of tort law or past practice, that sort of thing. And it allows somebody to use that site largely the way it's been used and will continue to be used, but also does not force our hand to make a decision along Broomfield Road as to what we want to see. Because I agree, I mean, partly for selfish reasons, I can count commissioners here who live within a mile or two of that site, and part of the reason they live there is because they have a rural buffer around them. So even though it's spot zoning, I am not necessarily against considering, you know, only acting on that particular parcel to recognize its use and reserving judgment on the rest.
I think the point I was trying to make before I got carried away was that it's a much larger question,
Yeah,
and a lot of it is the future of that sector of the township.
which is why I'm hesitant.
Yeah.
That
I
my
know.
first gut reaction was, wow, that's a lot of area to rezone in an area that's currently agricultural. And if we were to look at those things one at a time, as you know, as an applicant came forward and said, I want to rezone this, I mean, I don't know if that makes it easier or harder to have some consistency with master planning and future land use. But I do think that the most conservative way to address an immediate need is only to look at that, even if it is incongruent with a general zoning goal of trying to keep things contiguous and, you know, consistent across zoning.
And certainly, as I said, one of the choices is absolutely do nothing at all right now and simply make note of this, and we look at this area as part of our updating the master plan. So, and that's a completely valid response. The owner of the property has said that they can come before you through an application process anytime they choose to rezone just the one parcel. And obviously you'd have to consider that and look at all the factors, and we have you know, the factors to consider in the ordinance. And so you could look at that on that case basis as part of an application.
It would, and it would admittedly be, it would be difficult for me to look at a business who is there and say, hey, this has been the use for decades, and I'm asking to do slightly more than that, and deny that as a rezoning. But that, again, I'm probably beating a dead horse now, so.
I appreciate it.
I think I agree with you. I think the spot zoning is not appealing if you're choosing to do it now for the future, when it's outside of the guidance that's been set up by the master plan. But if you're trying to correct what effectively were probably not the best decisions from the past, or at least not sort of consistent within at least current practices, obviously this is a historical issue, I agree. I think that spot zoning in a case like this makes sense because it deals with the situation that we inherited as a commission,
Yeah.
not one that we created.
Right.
Would you like us to just put this back on the agenda for next month, that we can think about it some and
I think we just have someone with consensus. I mean, is there something that your thoughts were, maybe we could at least get the ball rolling tonight so they can get this business operating in the manner they want it to?
Well, what I would suggest, if we're going to initiate a township rezoning, I'd like to include both the city parcel and 4245, just because it gets us over to the area that at least close to the B4 district that's over there, and then we're not simply taking action on one parcel. So if we're doing township initiated rezoning, I'd like to at least at the minimum do that narrow focus of those two parcels. If you really rather consider just one parcel, then I think the direction would be to have the property owner simply apply for rezoning as through the normal process, and that would be looked at
I mean, I would tend to agree with the water facility is unlikely to go anywhere. And again, it would be, for right or for wrong, it would just simply be acknowledging a current use that's not going away. So it's really, whether it's rectifying a situation or if it's just simply acknowledging and codifying it, I guess I'm not necessarily against a rezoning of the two plots. I tend to think that I would want to keep it in B5 with special use permits as opposed to pushing it to I1 right now, but I don't know, that's just my gut. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not thrilled with I understand the rationale for wanting to include the property, but when you use the justification of it gets us closer to that other property, I don't like that at all, because I feel like that's pushing us in the direction of, because there's gonna be people, as soon as that's rezoned, there's gonna be people knocking on our door wanting to rezone a lot of that property in that area, and we're gonna be under a great deal of pressure to do that.
Well, in that circumstance, if that's your preference, I would suggest we just let the owner apply for rezoning of the single parcel then, and we'll,
Well, that's my opinion,
The
but
only thing
I
with
don't
that,
speak for the entire commission.
the only thing with that, Phil, is that's what it is. I mean, unfortunately, it wasn't rezoned properly. I mean, that could be an argument if somebody were to come forward and it wasn't necessarily the same circumstances. We could say, well, we're just correcting the issue. With
Yeah.
the water treatment facility and then the 4245 south.
But again, the water treatment facility could have gone anywhere, right?
Yeah.
It's a public necessity.
So
thing.
you're right. It's not. It's irrelevant if we change that.
Well, except to the extent that it will encourage or give the message that you know,
Adjacent zoning.
yeah, that everything is going to be B4 or B5 in that area.
I tend to agree. I want to, I am supportive of seeing that particular property being rezoned to reflect its in the current use and future use. So I have no problem with that. But I could be convinced to say, hey, you know what? Let's take up all the rest of it with master planning and have a thorough conversation about it. And so I guess for my part, I would say that if you were to come forward in the future and say, hey, I'm going to apply for a rezoning of just that parcel, I would generally be supportive of that rezoning.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Which would be the best interest for the township as far as B5 or is it I1?
yeah, B5, yeah, I think I is industrial.
Okay. Whatever is the best interest for if
Yeah,
I can apply for either, I1's the easiest for me.
Yeah.
B5 is not difficult for me to do and then do a special use, like you said, for
Right.
the warehousing.
Right.
I mean, whatever you want.
I'm personally kind of guessing because if we do have a conversation about rezoning along Broomfield in the future, like what might be more congruent to what that is. So I'm kind of just guessing that maybe B5 would feel more appropriate for that ring road, but I don't have a strong opinion as to which way it goes. And quite frankly, I don't know. Rezoning it right now would be spot zoning anyways, so I don't know that personally that we would be locked into saying, all right, everything else along Broomfield has to be that zoning. We could go the opposite if we decided to, but it feels to me like if we were going to rezone Broomfield that we would rezone as B5 first, but maybe I'm wrong. That's a non-answer.
Well, it's sort of
Yeah.
like in the property owners in the area, which is going to freak them out more? If you do an I-9, are they gonna say, oh my gosh, everything's gonna be industrial here? Or are they gonna, how are people locally gonna react, or does it matter? Will
Yeah.
they even notice?
I mean,
If the use doesn't notice, does the zoning matter
Yeah.
in this case?
When we look at our master planning, the light industrial This district is intended for a blend of medium-intensity commercial and small-scale light industrial uses. Light industrial uses include, but are not limited to, small-scale manufacturing, laboratories, R&D, research and development firms, information technology firms, or other businesses that might be found in a technology park. So I personally think, and I do think that if you came to us, regardless of whether you chose, if we don't take action on anything else for rezoning, I'm inclined to approve a use for that reflects its current use. So if it's, whether it's light industrial or whether it's B5, I'm probably going to be supportive of either one, and I reserve judgment as to what I think the rest of it should be. And if that means we have a spot zone parcel, well, we have a spot zone parcel. So, but I do think that the light industrial is something that is desirable. It's more congruent with being mixed with, you know, R1 or something like that than industrial would be. And so I would be okay with that being a light industrial too. So, but I know there's business owners along Broomfield who expect and want that to be developed someday. That's not, there's a good chance that won't be developed as residential. So.
So I don't know that we have an answer one way or the other. It doesn't sound like, though, that this has to be decided tonight, so probably you guys can have some further conversations about what you think makes the most sense, and maybe we discuss it again as well, or I don't know.
So I believe I take over, we're gonna close sometime in the next 15 or 20 days. So prior to the next meeting, could we come with an application for that rezoning or spot rezoning on the December meeting, or would you want that pushed up?
We can talk about that.
Got it.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yep,
Yeah.
with this, we can talk about it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's gonna involve a public hearing, so there's gotta be a certain amount of notice
Gotcha.
ahead of time to get it in the newspaper and so on, so. And then we get to see who turns up and comments on it and what the lay of the land is.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for bringing this to our attention, Rodney. So, the next item is the other business, which is the zoning ordinance amendment punch list 2. And so, I'll let you introduce that.
Well, thank you. This is the item that was on your agenda last month. We started the discussion. The only change to it was to correct the typo in the number of Board of Appeals members, which is on page 103 of your packet, where we just highlighted there that corrected it from 3 to 5. So everything else is the same as what you saw last month. This is a set of proposed amendments largely that come up through application of the ordinance to various projects. Correcting some gaps in the zoning districts, correcting a few errors that we've come across, updating the plan unit development section to frankly, to make it a little bit more flexible. The language, the eligibility language was actually sort of master plan language. It's not really ordinance language, and so we're making it more of an ordinance process, but also improving the flexibility for you to look at a plan unit development application. And then updates to the Zoning Board of Appeals section related to compliance with state law, and also some changes related to self-storage buildings. So as we started the conversation last month, this is brought before you with for your consideration to look at setting a public hearing. As I said, if we can make changes to the ordinance before the hearing process, add or remove from this set, but these are the items the staff found were needed to be brought forward at this point. So happy to answer questions as we go through the discussion.
So basically, we're at the juncture where, question is it ready to go, to a public hearing? If not, what else do we wanna see and that sort of thing?
Correct.
Okay, so it's open for discussion. If anybody has any concerns or anything else, or any concerns with what's in there, or any other issues that you wanna see addressed?
Yeah, I mean, my only concerns, I had mentioned at the last meeting, in section 3.19, PUD Plan Unit Development District, letter C, sorry, it'd be actually C1, E and G. You know, based on having those two included, I'm not comfortable moving forward with a public hearing as this has been presented.
What page are you on?
Page 90, that would be easier. Page 90, letters E and G.
E and G.
As I mentioned in the last planning commission meeting. Other than that, at this point, I don't have any other concerns other than those two.
Yeah, I think we had a fairly substantial conversation about it at the last meeting. I'm not as I see the E and G as being they're not shall, and I certainly understand your point in terms of I wouldn't want the I wouldn't want to give the impression that the planning commission is dictating, well, you will do this, you'll have to do this or that. But I do think that I am comfortable having a may in there in terms of, you know, asking for, having flexibility for the planning commission to ask for the type of housing that it needs as well. But I would say outside of that, generally speaking, outside of that, I looked through it again and I don't see any other issues. Generally speaking, I am comfortable with the language, and so I don't know where we are in terms of addressing that specific issue in the PUD or not, I guess.
Yeah, and my only concern is may opens up the opportunity for a specific commissioner or a commissioners to indicate that they want specific this or else they won't approve it. And in regards to G, I don't think that's really in our purview. The person doing it, putting their money invested in it, whatever market study they do, if they deem it appropriate, why do they need to supply that to us? I just think that's township overreach.
If I may, just a quick comment on this. I respect the point of view, absolutely. And the goal with the market study or documentation like that is to simply to show that it actually can be done. Remember, the PUD is an optional form of development. Nobody has to follow this. They can certainly just simply follow the underlying zoning. So if the property is zoned residential, go forth and develop it. If it come in with a site condominium development through site plan review or subdivision plat through the plating process, these requirements don't apply. These elements apply only when somebody's coming before you with something that is a little different. It doesn't quite fit into the box of the zoning district. It might be a mixed-use development of some sort or it might be something where they want to, quite frankly, as the Prestige Center did, they want to do something that didn't fit into the narrow box of the B4 district that it was in. Even though that B4 district allowed nursing homes, it didn't allow the full scope of what they were wanting to do. And so the PUD allowed them to come before you and propose something that was a little broader. When it comes to that, though, there is an element that this is a collaborative process. This is with developers proposing something, but it's also the township saying, you know, we agree that makes good sense on this property. It at least is consistent with the master plan or whatever criteria you're looking at in terms of the ordinance here, you find that this would be a beneficial element to have in the community, even if it doesn't fit into the narrow box of the underlying zoning. And so requiring potentially, again, a may, requiring a developer to show that, yeah, we can pull this off. We're not asking them to give us proprietary numbers. We're asking them to show us that if in some cases this doesn't, wait a minute, how can you do that? We don't have a market for that. You know, at least you can ask and say, can you show us how this is going to work? How you can make this development happen? That's all that this is asking for. Because somebody can come before you with something very high in the sky as a plan unit development. And without a provision like this, it's a little bit harder to say, wait a minute, show me how this could possibly make sense. So that's really what that's about. In terms of the scope of it, as it says here, it's intended to simply provide documentation. That might be a market study, but it doesn't have to be. It could be something as a letter, even if, this is something that would be up to you as a planning commission, as a body, not to individual commissioners, but you as a commission, as a body, to look at and decide whether you feel this is something that satisfies, that you're okay with in terms of there's a market for this, that you can make a recommendation to the board. Because that's the other element of this to consider, is that with a plan unit development, you are the recommending body. You hold a hearing, but you're making a recommendation to the board of trustees. So you as a planning commission, as a body, have to decide if something meets the eligibility criteria and is consistent with these elements. As part of your recommendation, then you share that with the board of trustees, who then make the final decision. So one commissioner, one board member is not going to stop a project, but these elements do give you some tools to use if there's a project that comes in that just doesn't seem quite right. Because with a PUD, they can come in with something unusual. And these give you some tools to work with if you feel you have a need to ask for that additional information.
The thing that I think that I guess I would point out for the Planning Commission's benefit is that the entirety of the PUD in general it relies on a may require or may approve. There's no use by right for a PUD. So, at least not that I see. There's no use by right. In fact, we say under eligibility criteria, to be eligible for the plan unit development approval, the applicant must demonstrate the following be met: sufficient land area for proposed uses, they're in a certain location, the parcel in question has unique characteristics that significantly, we're already asking them to demonstrate several things in order to be considered for it. So, compatibility with master plan, a number of things. So I guess from that standpoint, if a commission was dead set on stopping something with a PUD, they're going to stop it, whether that requirement's in there or not.
What if someone came forward and we did say we'd like a market study, and they did do a market study, and the market study really didn't show for or against? So we have no information, and the developer's like, I'm doubling down. Let's do it.
But am I wrong? It's not a use by right.
Right. Unlike for site plans, as we've talked about, the state law and our zoning ordinance says if the site plan meets all of our requirements, all the zoning ordinance requirements, it must be approved. Interestingly, special use permits, the language is the same in the state law. If they meet the standards for special use permit approval, if you find they meet all those standards, then you must approve the special use permit. There is no similar language for the authorization for plan unit developments. It is truly an optional development process, both for the property owner or developer and for the township. You as a planning commission can simply recommend, no, we don't feel this is right for this area. Here are our reasons why we don't feel that way. The board can accept that if they choose and agree and say, nope, we're not going to move forward with this. You're welcome to follow the underlying zoning, because they can do that no matter what. Whatever the zoning is or whatever the master plan is. Let's say the property is currently agriculturally zoned, but the master plan says residential. Well, they can come back and rezone the property residential, go through that process. So PUD is absolutely optional for all parties involved.
So the developer could say, I know you're asking me to do it, I'm not gonna do it.
We've invited some projects that have come to us at staff level and said, this seems like it might be a good fit for the PUD option, and we've had cases where they've chosen not to. The PUD is an interesting thing. It's been around for many years. I think it dates back into the 50s somewhere. In state zoning, I think it dates back to the 60s. And it was essentially a relief valve. The idea, if you don't fit into the type box, we need to find a way to be able to look at something that doesn't fit into the type box of Euclidean zoning. And so that's how it was established. But it is a case where it's not necessarily the best fit for everybody, but also, unfortunately, in some communities in Michigan, the PUD has sort of evolved into, in some cases, it's evolved in just a type of residential development. That's almost all that's allowed under the PUD is residential. And some communities use that PUD as somewhat of a shoving the developer's arm up behind to get what they want out of the developer. So there are some developers that are aware of history in places in Michigan where it has not used well, or it's frankly the rules are even more convoluted than regular zoning, just because it's evolved over time. Our PUD provisions are designed based on the state law to be a flexible option. It's a relief valve is not the best word for it, but it's simply an option for to bring forth something that might be innovative or unique that doesn't fit into the narrow box of the zoning district. And so everything about the PUD section, including these proposed amendments, is about that, providing a way for somebody to come to you with something creative that you can look at and the board can look at that doesn't fit into the narrow box of the underlying zoning. Because obviously, if it fit into the underlying zoning, why go through the PUD process? So, it's not for everyone. It does require both a plan commission action and a board action, and then they have to come back to you for site plan approval, just as the Prestige Center is doing. So it's not the fastest process either, but it does provide possibilities, provides options, and so this is all about setting the things up to be able to do that in the best way possible.
So on G, a potential request for a market study, so you're asking to essentially prove the viability of the business, right?
No, we're asking them well, you are asking, if you ask, you are asking for them to provide you with some documentation to show that this can work.
Okay, because it seemed like a few months ago, there was a project on Broomfield, and there was some discussion about, I think it was doctor offices and some apartments, whether we thought that was even a viable business. And I thought the discussion was, that's not up to us, that's up to the people doing that project. If I remember right, now we're kind of flipping and saying we may request for them to prove that that's a viable business through a market study.
Well, that's a good example. So that it was called the Den on Broomfield, and it was a mixed-use building. When we updated our zoning ordinance, we kind of cleaned up the mixed-use building standards, allowed them to be more flexible, frankly. And out of that came the original Den on Broomfield project, which was a two three-story buildings next to one another. Commercial on the first floor, commercial office,
Right.
apartments above. That was site plan approval. Didn't require anything else, just site plan approval. They got their site plan approvals. The project did not get started. Various private reasons. It was financial. There was what we were told by the project engineer was that the bank was not happy with the return on investment from that building. They came back with a planned unit development application. Still a mixed-use building. This time it was going to be one building, 4 stories tall. So it's 3 floors of apartments, same commercial on the first floor. So with a little bigger footprint on all of it. That came through as a planned unit development, and that started the process, but it did not complete the process. And the reason it didn't complete the process was that the owner came to the conclusion that it still was not financially viable. And this was based on the massive increases in construction costs over the last year. That they felt it was just not a good time to be pursuing the project. So at this point, the project is stopped. They still have an approved site plan for the original that will expire shortly. But they can come back and renew it fairly easily, or they can come to you and ask to extend it if they chose to. But that's a case where financial viability turned out to be a concern. It was actually not our concern, but it turned out to be the owner's concern. And they chose ultimately to end that PUD application. I wouldn't be surprised if down the road somewhere it comes back again. But that financial viability was definitely a case there, and so this is a tool that you can use to bring it up if you see a financial concern. Obviously that was private, but there's no reason why commissioners could not say, this seems like we ought to be asking for more. And keep in mind, any of these decisions you make as a group. So ultimately, if it comes down to it, you can have a vote, have a motion to ask for this documentation. And if that motion goes down, then you're not asking for it. But if a majority of the commission says, yeah, I agree, we really need to have more, then you're acting as a body to say we would like this additional information.
It sounds like there's a pretty good understanding of, philosophically, whether you're, I guess, for or against that language. What do you need do you need a motion from us to set a public meeting, or, how are we deciding what comes next year?
Well, if certainly a motion to set a hearing certainly be in order. Staff can set the hearing date if there's a consensus that you feel this is ready to go. So we don't need a formal action. If you feel like a motion is best to kind of settle the issue related to these items, you're certainly welcome to make one either in terms of keeping these or removing them, or setting a hearing date for this as it's proposed. So it can be by consensus or make a motion.
What's everybody's pleasure?
Is there objection to moving forward with setting a public hearing date for this as it currently stands?
I would object to that, yes.
Keeping in mind that we're moving towards ultimately a recommendation to the Board of Trustees, correct?
That's correct.
And remind me again, for a change to the zoning ordinance, do they also conduct a public hearing?
They do not, no. It's reviewed, you hold a hearing and make a recommendation. The amendment is also reviewed by our county planning commission, because the state law requires that, and then it goes to the Board of Trustees, and they hold, under the Charter Township Act, they have to hold 2 readings, so not hearings. Okay. But we do have a notice in between, so there's a notice that's put in the paper of the second reading.
Okay.
And that notice is also posted on our website and here at the hall. So there's notice, but it's not quite to the depth of a hearing.
Okay. And so, we conduct a public hearing, and then after the public hearing, we're still, this document is here, and we either approve it as is and send it on to the Board of Trustees, or we revise it.
Right. You absolutely can revise it at any time.
We're not approving the document tonight. We're just deciding whether or not to have the public hearing. Okay.
So revisions can be made.
Yes, absolutely.
So if some developers came to the public hearing and gave us, just earth-shatteringly good arguments about why certain things in here might be bad ideas, we might choose to say, okay, maybe we won't include such and such, or we might decide, yes, we're happy with it. Any of those things are possible, right? Okay. Well, I guess I would entertain a motion to ask the township staff to set a public hearing for this. I think that's probably appropriate at this point.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so there was a motion by Buckley with a second by Lapp to asked township staff to set a public hearing for the draft revisions to the zoning ordinance, colloquially known as punch list 2. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
I'm not quite sure if my mic is working, so I'll talk louder. Shingles,
Yes.
Waring,
Yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Squadrito,
Yes.
Albrecht,
Yes.
Buckley,
Yes.
LaBelle,
No.
Lab.
Yes.
Okay, we have 7 yeses, 1 no, motion carries.
So we will watch for that further word on that. Do you anticipate that that would be in December, or is it going to be later than that?
I think it certainly can be in December.
Okay.
We have time.
All right. So then, okay. So now, next item is extended public comment. So this is a portion of the meeting where individuals are invited to address the planning commission on any item, whether it's on tonight's agenda or not. Again, we invite you to come to the podium, give us your name and address for the minutes, and we ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes on any issue. Extended public comment is open at 8:50.
Josh Nelson, here on behalf of my wife and myself, 3811, 3813 South Lincoln Road. And my comments are related to the discussion you just ended. And I want to share a circumstance that seems to be driving several of the proposed zoning amendment changes, zoning ordinance changes. 3813 South Lincoln Road became the subject of prolonged disagreement between us and the Township zoning administrator regarding interpretation of nonconformity in this ordinance. This disagreement was not resolved at the ZBA and ultimately ended in a county court ruling in our favor of April of this year. In light of this, I ask the Commission consider these two things before deliberating certain changes to the ordinance. There is a paragraph in the zoning ordinance stating the zoning responsible is administrator for maintaining records of non-conforming uses and structures as accurately as feasible. And as part of 2 Freedom of Information Act requests during our dispute, I was provided no record of the non-conforming use or structure status for our property or any other property in Union Township. So practically, this forces me to conclude that many of the changes regarding accessory dwellings, non-conforming single-family dwellings, and others is in direct response to the township losing a lawsuit rather than improving the ordinance to the benefit of those governed by it. A question from your commission at the previous meeting asked if any of these zoning ordinance changes would create new nonconformities or adversely affect existing situations. It's my opinion that that question cannot be adequately answered with a lack of records. To my second point, several statements in the new paragraph 12.6 seem to create arbitrary burdens, primarily serving the purpose of restricting non-conforming uses and structures, like ours, and not expanding protections and providing benefits to mortgagors and insurers, as the paragraph introduction proposes. I ask that the Commission weigh the purpose, necessity, and applicability of some of these changes as you proceed to public hearing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Have you submitted anything in writing on this? Like a letter or anything?
Is specifically?
Yeah,
No. I just learned about this 2 days ago, or I would have been at the previous meeting.
okay. I would encourage you at some point, if you have something in writing, to send it on so that we have it as just something to have in front of us with all the information. I mean, we listened, but we took notes for the minutes, but if you send a letter, it'll be in exactly in the form that you want it communicated.
Sure.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, I'm going to assume that that was the only one. We thank the public for their comments. Go ahead and close that back up at 8:54. Now we move to final board comment. Any comments from board members?
Yeah, I mean, I just had a question for Rodney. Back on the Prestige, when where there was maybe some confusion on, Commissioner Butler and I's part, just wondering that the preliminary site plan as presented or preliminary site plan with conditions, could the one with conditions, could that have been something where you do a preliminary and final site plan with the conditions? Could we have done that?
I think next time we set the motions up the same way we did the last time we had the combined preliminary final, which was the Mid-Michigan College athletic fields. I think next time that we have this circumstance, we'll do that. We'll set that version up to be a combined preliminary final with conditions. The challenge is that, frankly, the condition list would be longer and far more specific. That's a very general statement.
Gotcha.
And instead we would be specific. Thou shalt do this, thou shalt do this, thou shalt do this. It would be a list. I remember how many check boxes there were in that report. There's probably 8 or 9 of them, and I think so. Probably a list like that, because if you are approving it and putting it to our hands, we want those conditions to be specific and not something up to interpretation. But yeah, we can certainly provide you with that for next time.
Okay. Yeah, because I just remember, and I don't know when, sometime maybe this year, that I asked that question about, I think there was some sensitivity to approving a final site plan, even though there was some conditions that you were hesitant about that, which I totally understand. So that's why I was wondering, like, well, if we can do that, I mean, you know me, that's always my first preference, if we can keep things moving for people. Obviously, there's no time sensitivity here because they're not starting until later on, but hypothetically, if this was something, in August, September, October, when they're trying to maybe get started, that's where I'm thinking that may be advantageous to the applicant. That was all I was thinking.
Yeah, we'll make sure we'll set it up for that format. We'll make sure that option is in there instead of the preliminary only. It will be a combined.
Thank you.
I'm assuming you're familiar with what he was talking about. I guess I'm not that familiar with it. I'm not going to ask you to give us the rundown tonight, but if he does submit something in writing, I'm assuming you'll pass it along to us and we'll be prepared to fill in any details that we might ask about.
Absolutely. My thought is, let's let him submit it in writing. As he said, it is a court case. It's another circumstance, not quite the same as this one at 4245. The property he's talking about are houses that were moved to the township from the city, and that did actually predate our zoning ordinance. Moved it to the township site in the 1967, I believe. So they truly were legal non-conforming. One part of it was a legal non-conforming structure and a legal non-conforming use. Essentially 2 houses in the same lot. It did ultimately result in a Board of Appeals action, and he didn't like their action, and he took it to court, and so the judge, as he said, ruled in his favor. So, frankly, the changes here do not affect him at all because we operate under the court's decision related to that property, and it truly was unique. I've not run into another circumstance like it in the township. But anyway, I think we can certainly hear what he has to say, and we can talk more about the background of it if needed.
Any other comments from board members? If not, this is our last meeting before Thanksgiving, so have a great holiday, and we'll look forward to seeing people in December. We are adjourned. Thank you.